With our character, we are going to look at utilizing the rigging tool, which allows us to create what are called deformers inside Toon Boom's Harmony. So the deformers allow us to build bending or deforming animation. There are some challenges to be associated with it. It does allow you to work with a single layer of artwork. So in this case, this is one layer of artwork, this whole snake shape, where this is 3 layers of artwork, upper arm, lower arm, and hand, that I can rig together by first parenting the objects. So if I look at the original artwork, we can see this is the original artwork before it's been animated. But in my camera view, we can see the distortions that are starting to happen. And if I use my animation tool and turn back on the controls so that I can see them, so that we can see there is my rig. Now if I grab my animation tool, with this I can now bend, and we can see how the artwork will bend or pucker, and it struggles if we go too far to figure out what to do with it. But what's also nice is I can grab these control points and modify the overall shape of my artwork as well. So if I need that while I'm creating some type of bend or move in my character, I can adjust those. I can also modify what is the sphere of influence that's happening at this particular joint. So by grabbing that point on the circle, you can see how it modifies what is being affected. Now in a 3-layer or artwork where you have lines or patterns or shading inside the area that is being deformed, you're going to get some really challenging things happening as you work with it. But if I work with artwork that is more continuous in shape, like this, if we go too far, you can see it breaks it. And if we modify that circle, it changes how that bend happens. So you can see now the bend is working much better without the lines breaking until I cross 90 degrees. So here, with too small of a circle, we can see that doesn't work. But if I now make that a little bit bigger, we'll get the ability to move a little bit further in the animation. Seeing a little bit of this, I'm just going to turn those layers off. I'm going to add in a new drawing layer. And this will be my worm. So on this drawing layer, if I have a base shape that I am going to be working with, now I am going to create sections within this to show that if we have different colors and different shapes, we can sometimes run into issues while we are using it. So this is not a perfect tool, but it is a tool that can be useful in certain situations while we are animating. So once I have this tool, oops, I added it to an existing layer. Let me drag it out. So here is that worm. To add the bones to this, I use the rigging tool. If your rigging tool isn't if you can't find it, go under toolbars and keep turning everything on until it shows up. But with the rigging tool, I click on the rigging tool and I click on what I want to be my first bone or my first point. And then I move further along my object and I click again and I keep clicking, the more points I add, the more I can modify this object, but also the harder it becomes to control it. And to be able to control the head section on this worm that I'm drawing, I want to add one more point that extends beyond my character. That means I will now be able to shift this, but I should have put the second to last one at the base of its head and then extend one out, so now I have a handle to modify it. Because when I use my transform, I can now grab that final point and animate my character. As you put in your bones, you may decide that you did not put the bone in the correct place. With the rigging tool, you are able to then go and modify where those bones sit on your artwork. You can just grab a bone point and modify that bone, adjusting where it's going to be inside your artwork so that you can control. And the time to get your bones situated is before you start animating. Once you start animating, it gets really messy if you try and adjust the bone chain. So it's best to get your bones configured the best as you're able before you start the animation process. Once you have your bones configured in your artwork, you will then have animation turned on. You will use the transform tool to select the bones and move them to animate. It's highly recommended that you hit F6 at each point that you wish to start animating, because otherwise you get some pretty weird results along the way where some bones will then behave a little bit odd in relation to each other. It's not so bad on a single layer artwork, but on multiple layered artwork that you hold together with the bone chain, it will get funky if you don't add in a keyframe every time you decide to make a change. So if I move out in time and decide I want to do some movement, I can then take my artwork and bend it up. What's really nice about this is I can use my familiar Shift B commands to move through my bone chain to adjust what I am doing. So if I click on a bone, I can then manipulate it and move it. So I just hit B on the keyboard to cycle back. Shift B will move me to that next bone. But now if I look at my animation, I'll see how I'm able to pull it in and create a smooth curving bend, which with cutout animation that would be difficult, but frame by frame animation you could pull that off. This is certainly faster with a lot more flexibility in it. I can move further out in my timeline, hit F6 for an additional keyframe. And then I'm going to, if I want to shift all of my artwork, I go to my initial bone that I started with. If I want to see previous frames, we can turn on keyframing so we can see where our artwork started to get a better sense of how it's moving. And then I can click on the bone that I wish to affect. And this can be a fairly effective and quick way of creating your movement and animation in your projects with curving or bending artwork. So the first way is with a single layer of drawing. We will look at rigging together a series of parented layers with an arm or a leg and how we might accomplish a similar feat, but using parent-child layers and parent-child artwork. It's important when you're working with the bones to remember that when you animate them, you need to have the transform tool selected. Ideally, you have animate turned on, so it's inserting keyframes for you. If you wish to modify the bones, you go back to your rigging tool, and with the rigging tool, then you can adjust where that bone structure sits in your artwork so that you are able to then do what you need to do. When you are rigging and you scrub your timeline, you'll notice that with the rigging tool active, it doesn't show artwork. We don't see things happening. So now if I'm at this frame and go back to my rigging tool, it flattens back out my artwork. Because what it's doing is it's showing me the artwork in relation to the rig, not how it's been transformed on any given keyframe. So it's starting out with what is its base default information, and that is what it's going to demonstrate to us. Rigged, if I take my artwork and adjust it quite a bit, move that around, do some other odds and ends. If I wanted to modify my snake head, if I click into my drawing view, it brings me back to the artwork itself. This is the artwork without the rig, so now if I were to paint on this layer, beside my snake had a much bigger eye. Well, that's not going to work. Let's try. And it has its tongue coming out. So now if I have my snake, if I go back to my camera view, we can see how that has been added to it. So it's important to try to make sure that we pay attention to the difference between camera view and drawing view. Drawing view shows me my artwork. Camera view is really what's going on in my animation. Now if I have this and go back to my rigging tool, I may decide that I want to add in. So if I click on a bone, then I click and add another bone in. So now I have additional bones that I can then use when I'm animating. So now with these bones, my artwork is having a little bit of a difficult time figuring out what to do with some of it, but we will see how we could do additional movements as part of it. So adding anything post beginning of animation can cause some difficulty. Now this does introduce a little bit of and this distortion is happening because we now have two IK chains connected together. It's possible to rig up a character where we attach one IK chain for the torso and then attach to that separate ones for arms and legs. That is a way of working. It can be somewhat complex. It's often easier to have separate chains tied to separate artwork for each limb or body. That's easier to control. At the end of the day, it comes down to what is your character. With 3 layers, arm, hand, arm, lower, arm, upper, I'm going to make the lower a child of the upper, the hand a child of the lower. So now I have my arm group. Now with that arm group, if I grab the rigging tool and select the arm group here and click at the first point, now I can click at the elbow, I will click at the wrist, and then add my final point out to give some access and control for the hand. I'm going to increase the size of influence so I have a little more bend, but we'll notice how those lines will cause us trouble. If I grab my animation tool, let's just stretch this out, F5, can collapse my bone layer. Again, as always, hit F6 as your opening start, go over to frame 10, I can pull that down, I can bend at the arm, I can bend the hand in whatever direction I want. We'll notice that there's a little puckering going on here. If I adjust that, we'll see how it affects it as it goes. If I move over to frame 20, F6 for a keyframe. Once again, pull it over, pull it up. Can also take and shorten these. So if you have, again, the character with spaghetti arms, where then you have a hand attached to the spaghetti arm, this can be a really easy way to do some nice animation as you start moving and bending your character. So that's much faster, and it creates a little more fluid artwork than just straight cutout. But I still have all the advantages of working with standard layered artwork, where I have each drawing layer as part of my project. So I can cycle through those drawing layers. I can have drawing substitutions set up, but then I have the flexibility of animating through using a rig setup. The rig setup gives us flexibility we can't get just by doing straight transforms, where we are modifying or translating position, rotation, and scale and skewing of our artwork. So it's a different thing that at the end gives us the same end result. My recommendation, if you're going to use this, is you apply the rig to the limbs, but you don't try and create one master rig that has all the limbs attached to a torso rig, because that's much, much, much harder to control.